It's a very controversial subject within Christianity, I would say. So you do not see images of God the Father until about the 13th century. There are a few like random things that happen in the 12th century, but you really don't see any images of God the Father. Every time you see a manifestation of God in the world, it is always Christ who's shown. And so even the creation, so if you see an image of the creation of the world, it's actually Christ creating the world in medieval imagery, because he is the Logos, he's the divine Logos. And there's also a mystery. There's another mystery about a kind of mystery about the role of the human in the divine economy. Let's just say it that way. And so what happens in the late Middle Ages with a lot of other kind of aberrations is this desire to represent God the Father. And it happens in the West very, in the time, for me, like the image of Michelangelo, God creating Adam, to me, that's an aberration. It's a theological aberration, and it's something of a monstrosity, actually. I don't particularly like, I mean, it's visually beautiful, like it's well painted, but theologically, it's a bit of a monstrosity.
Well, what don't you like about it?
Well, because who is this character who's creating Adam? Like, who is he? Is it God the Father? Is that what it's supposed to be? And if it's God the Father, why is he surrounded by naked babies? Like, there's all these weird things about it. Like, it's just there's so many strange things about that image. And what is this? Like, it says in Scripture that God created the world through speech,
the touching of the fingers for the record.
What is the touching of the fingers? It seems to be just kind of innovation for innovation's sake. I'm going to alienate all the people who like Michelangelo.
But like you said, it's artistically impressive. It's not a commentary on his artistic prowess. I mean, I suppose that this points to the larger observation that I'm trying to make, which is you look at an image like this and you think, very pretty and all, but surely this is theologically bunk. I mean, you've got this old man with a beard and he's sort of reaching out and all this kind of stuff. But isn't that the case of all depictions of something that is almost by definition, if not by definition, ineffable?
Yeah, and that's why the Seventh Ecumenical Council and the fathers around the Seventh Ecumenical Council say we do not represent God. We don't. We represent Christ in the incarnation, and that we represent the person of Christ. And there is a mystery there, right? Which is the manner in which the human becomes God in the incarnation. But it's a kind of mystery that we don't go into too much. But that, like I said, so now, for example, I would never represent God the Father, and I would say that most Orthodox iconographers today would never represent God the Father. And it did happen, even in Orthodoxy, like in the later 16th, 17th century, it starts to appear. And to me, it's a sign of theological decline when something like that happens, where people don't understand what they're doing anymore. They don't understand that there are metaphysical questions behind these decisions that the church put forth and exactly like you said, you do not, like, there are things that cannot be represented by their nature, and therefore you do not represent them because it's an aberration to do so.
I suppose I'm interested in whether you wouldn't depict God the Father in the sense that you want to have this theological reverence for the Father, or if it's a more practical concern that you're essentially getting it wrong and might thereby be misleading people who look at this imagery and have the wrong idea of what God is.
Well, obviously, you would have a wrong idea what God is. If you think that God is the bearded man in the sky, like, you would definitely get, and it fueled a lot of the silly secularist arguments about God. You have to realize, even the Reformation, for example, like, I'm not a big fan of the Reformation, but if you look at the images they were reacting against at that time, they were reacting against these images of a bearded guy in the sky with the triangle halo. And it was like, who is that figure? Is it God? Like God the Father? And now we're not at all in Trinitarian theology in any way. We're just returning to kind of pagan. It's Zeus, basically, and it's already Zeus in this in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, in my opinion.
Well, the interesting thing about the Sistine Chapel is that it's not really a chapel; it's a museum. You have to queue up for goodness knows how long, and then they also now force you to go through the contemporary art section where there's sort of I don't know, a sort of metal, a bunch of sort of metal sticks all pointing out in different directions, and it's called the Adoration of Christ or something, and it sort of doesn't really. I'm sure it means something, but I find it. I've always found it a little bit difficult to understand. I thought that part should be optional at the very least, and then finally you manage to get into the Sistine Chapel, and it's just security guards sort of shoving you into the middle to get you out of the way of the flowing traffic, and constantly telling people not to take photos, because it says, like, please be respectful. This is a religious site, so don't be talking, don't be taking photos, this kind of stuff. Dress modestly. And yet it seems to me that by opening up the gates in this way to allow floods of people to come in and just sort of gawk at the ceiling, like, what are they admiring there? I was arguing with a friend last night about this, and he said, look, it allows you to turn your head upwards and to really be able to turn your attention to God, and the beauty that you perceive in this, you recognize as a reflection of the beauty of God. And I'm thinking, I was not impressed by God in that chapel. I was impressed by Michelangelo.
Yeah.
Now, as a secularist, that's fine. I don't mind. I'm an atheist. That was a great experience. That was one of the best experiences I can have in a chapel. But surely this is a troublesome thing to do to a chapel, to transform it into a gallery in this way.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, first of all, with Michelangelo, that there's something about Michelangelo which can be understood. The story about the Pieta, of how, when he created it, someone said, oh, it's Raphael who carved that. And he went at night, to carve his name in the belt, in the Virgin's belt. And so
it's the only piece that he ever signed, I think. It's the only sculpture that Michelangelo ever put his name on.
So this is the transformation that happens during the Renaissance, which is in some ways, this kind of idea of the genius of the artist. And this moves on, then it'll move into Romanticism and this, the idea of the artist that we kind of have today. Of course, my approach to art is more traditional, I would say, or my desire. I don't probably succeed all the time, but there is a sense of entering into a tradition and entering into a language, maybe is the best way to understand it, a language that has been fine-tuned for 1,000 years in the church and in the life of the church, and that has theological import. So the decisions that I make are informed by the theological tradition. So that's why that Eastern Orthodox icons in general have that characteristic.
If you liked that clip, then you'll love the full conversation, which you can watch right now by clicking just here. Go on.